Thank you. Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me. I'm a managing director and CEO of Nation Media Group, Jeffrey Odundo, also our host at this conference, and thank you so much for inviting me and all the others. Distinguished guests here present, all protocols observed, because I know there are a lot of important people here. That okay now? Maybe better, yeah. Before I get to my remarks, I would like to confirm a large part of what the CEO has told us in terms of the contribution of the nation to empowering the women of Kenya. And I want to talk from my own personal experience. Mr. Odundo, I don't think you were there at that time, in 1992. I had the experience, if you recall, and my sister there, older sister, Kitoni, she would also remember, our very first batch of women political leaders who graced that August House in 1992 were actually prepared and trained by some of us, and I was the lead trainer for those women. Nobody knew them. People were hearing names like Charity Gilu. They would say, Charity who? Father Karoa, nobody knew her. Now everybody knows her. You don't even need to say the whole name. They made history. 6 of them entered that August House. It was 0 at that time. There was no single woman. And the then president had his son. He's not even going to appoint any one of them, and he did not. So some of us worked very hard. And where does the Nation Media Group come in? You partnered with us to give visibility to these women. And you didn't charge us anything. The only thing we had to do was to prepare the profiles and bring them to the nation. And you would publish them for us. We should clap for the nation. So you have a history of supporting women. And I'm saying this now because I may say some things which are not very complimentary, not directed at the Nation Media Group, but to what the media can do better. It's media. And so therefore, having said that, I want to start and go a little bit further than Beijing. Beijing starts in 1995. That's where we are saying Beijing at 30. And now we are talking about the next 30. But there was many other things that happened, important things we cannot afford to forget before Beijing. Beijing was sitting on the shoulders of a lot of work which had been done by women, not just here on the continent, but around the world. And I don't want to go to that centuries and centuries of history. I only want to go and make it the starting point of where many of us of our generation can remember. We had something called the UN Women's Decade, a whole decade dedicated to women of the world. And the final meeting to close that decade was held right here in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya, and came up with what was called the forward-looking strategies. And those forward-looking strategies were actually the platform on which the preparations for Beijing conference were made. There was a break of 10 years between 1985 and 1995. And so it behoves us at this point when we are doing a review and looking forward to remember that there was actually a decade dedicated entirely to women by the United Nations. And member states were obligated to do a lot of things to empower women, of which they didn't do. And that's why Beijing was then called to review progress and to ask serious questions moving forward. So, 40 years then, since the UN Women's Decade, and 30 years since Beijing, women's struggle to reclaim rights has made some progress, but hardly enough. 30 years ago, the world gathered in Beijing, and at the end of that conference, they left with a shared conviction that women's rights are human rights, and that gender equality was not a favor for women, but the foundation of a just, peaceful, and prosperous future that needed to be taken seriously by all members of this planet. They made some very bold and unapologetic commitments, which were summarized in what we call the 12 critical areas, and put them as urgent. They put an urgent sticker on them. And they knew, and we all knew, that government were not likely to make it urgent. And so we continued to persist throughout that period of 30 years, reminding the world that that conference was not just a conference like any other, and the resolutions were not like any other. And still we had a debt with ourselves and those coming after us. We treated it as women, those who are there and those who are now taking on the baton, that it was a contract between generations, a contract with the women who fought for the right to vote, to learn, and to lead, and a contract with those yet to be born, some of whom are here with us today, the Gen Zs, they were not born then, who would inherit the world we built or the inequalities we failed to dismantle. So today, as we stand at this 30-year milestone in this room, too many voices are still silenced. Too many rights still being debated and denied. I'm hoping at this summit, therefore, that we shall interrogate seriously this journey and begin to confront our shortcomings and to reimagine the road ahead, because the next 30 years will not be defined by speeches like this one, or now the speeches which are going to be made here today. It will be defined by the choices we make when the microphones are turned off, and they do turn off, and they can turn off for a long time, especially for women. And in so doing, we must ask ourselves and provide answers, in my view, to at least two fundamental questions. One, why has the struggle for women's rights been so painfully slow, despite centuries of spirited efforts by women's movements and organizations around the world to secure women's rights? Number two, what are we then going to do differently to render the final and fatal blow to the main obstacles we face? Patriarchy, hegemonic masculinity, and misogyny. There are other questions we can ask. So this summit, therefore, must be about rewriting the rules of engagement, renewing our commitment to this journey, charting out a pathway that spells out the how and the who for breaking the glass ceilings and making the future truly ours. This summit then must not only be about taking our seat at every decision-making table. We are already doing that, quite a number of us. But it's also about strengthening the agenda for action and seeing it through to implementation. Is our greatest failure. And therefore, our strategies need to radically shift from lamenting and proclaiming what we want and wish to happen in the next 30 years, and move towards implementing bold actions that can contribute to making the future truly female. In other words, at this summit, we need action-driven intergenerational conversation guided by very clear strategies that focus on developing a shared understanding on how we can harness the power and agency within us to decisively dismantle the dragon of inequality and social injustice. In this context, the media plays a pivotal role in informing, shaping public opinion, norms, values, and aspirations. The media can amplify women's voices, inspire and empower, but not all the time. And therefore, we have to ask, whose voices are being amplified and whose are still muted or muffled? As we look ahead to the next 30, it is crucial to reflect on how far we have come in empowering African women, especially, where we must go next, and the role the media can play in that regard. You recall that in the Beijing Platform of Action, the platform and the plan of action identified as one of the 12 pillars of action, women and the media, as a critical area of concern that needed to be addressed. Over the last 3 decades, we have witnessed, and we have to grant the media this, that the power of the media can be used positively and impactfully. And I want to give 2 examples. In 2013, you do recall, there was a rallying call, they call it a movement in this country, called the 2013 #Justice for Liz movement. Some of you remember that, those who are old enough. That was a campaign that was put in place by journalists, by bloggers, by women's and NGOs and citizens, and they used the social media platforms to demand justice for a young girl who was brutally and sexually assaulted. That public outrage, led by the media, forced action to be taken. The second example, which is more recent, in 2024, you do remember with the Gen Z uprising, that period, we had #and femicide AE, which is still with us. The concern is of femicide, the backlash it is demonstrating is very real and very present. A campaign was launched through social media to mobilize protests and demand action from authorities after a surge in cases of femicide in Kenya. And you have seen there have been some results, not enough, but at least the movement forward cannot be ignored. And the role of the media, jointly with those of us in society that take this seriously, has been quite encouraging. Despite this potential, the media's record is at best mixed. Too often, women's visibility is fleeting, celebrated as a novelty, then sidelined. I'm sure you can find some examples on that. Women are covered for their style and commercial value, not all the time, but most times, not their substance, and remembered for controversy, not contribution. I hope that's not how I'm personally remembered, but I'm not a very good example, am I? Young leaders full of potential, like Lynette Toto Chepkorir, you know her, she's the youngest member of our parliament, a woman member of parliament, and you know how she got into office. She made all of us very, very proud. She was amplified as a novelty, but she was not really nurtured as a legitimate long-term leader. Her governance efforts received little journalistic follow-through, which suggests that we really have a problem at that point that needs to be addressed. As there is a gendered tendency to sensationalize and discuss women's political worth and stories once their symbolic and market value begins to fade. This This is not simply a narrative problem or a place of pointing fingers. It is getting us to think about the deep-rooted problems that keep making us slide backwards and have all this, what we are calling backlash. This is a problem of power. The media sometimes demonstrates that it is unable to contain and to sustain women's voices, and therefore to continue to uphold and to build and to nurture their influence. And it's because the media, just like other institutions in our society, is still rooted in patriarchy, hegemonic masculinity, and the dictates of international capitalism, which we sometimes do not mention. So therefore, in the next 30, we must insist on gender-sensitive reporting, balanced representation in newsrooms, and the archiving of women's stories so that pioneers, both young and old, are not erased from history. This means demanding policy enforcement, holding platforms accountable for I always have a problem with this word, for algorithmic bias, and fostering a media culture where women are seen as substantive leaders, not for a while, but in a sustainable manner. Moving away from directives from the media and going to another area in the Beijing platform of action that we must flag at this conference, and the CEO has already mentioned it, the question of women's education. It was identified by the Beijing platform of action as the master key that unlocks all other rights in Africa. More girls are now in school than it was in 1995. Literacy rates have risen, and a few young women are breaking into science and technology, engineering, and mathematics, what we are calling, in short, STEM. But the reality is that huge disparities still exist in regard to access to higher quality education that prepares them for increasingly digital economies and job market. So therefore, the next study must dismantle the stereotypes in the curriculum, make digital literacy universal in reality, and ensure that rural girls, who are the majority, enjoy the same quality of education as those in urban areas. Because if we fail here, we risk building a future where technology advances, again, are full of inequalities. But equality stands still. But our actions do slide. We must therefore prioritize STEM education to foster a critical thinking and leadership skills that can empower women. The media still has a role here to play. It can help a great deal by highlighting the importance of STEM education and showcasing successful women in these fields. Regarding the matters related to health, especially women's reproductive health, this is an area critical for empowerment of women. And we have to ask, what have we done since Beijing? There has been progress in maternal health care, HIV/AIDS prevention, and access to family planning. And countries like Rwanda have done extremely well in that regard. In the case of reduced mortality rates, Rwanda measures at 70% performance through community health worker programs they have created there. We here in Kenya, we also created the free maternity care policies, which the problem has been more implementation and lack of policy here. More women are able to secure safe delivery facilities, and yet the gaps remain glaring. Too many women still die giving life. Too many girls are subjected to harmful practices like FGM, too many communities still treat women's health as negotiable rather than non-negotiable. So therefore, the next 30 must be about universal, gender-responsive health system that protect reproductive rights, prioritize mental health, and ensure no woman's life or well-being is sacrificed to political convenience. Media, I'll keep mentioning you because our focus is how you can help us, and that's why we are here with you. This is your forum, so you are bringing it home. You can help us here by actually doing what you do the best, which is to keep amplifying the importance of gender-responsive health system that project or protect reproductive rights, prioritize mental health, and ensure no woman's life or well-being is sacrificed. The media can further provide accurate and gender-sensitive reporting on women's health issues, raising awareness about preventable deaths and advocating for policies that support women's health. In regard to my favorite area, which is power and decision-making, here we have to start by celebrating our very own neighbor, Rwanda, for the record-breaking parliament that houses the largest number of women MPs in the world. We can clap for Rwanda. They give us hope, even for us, that one day we'll get there too. We recognize trailblazers as Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, who became the first female president of her country, and she is also a Nobel Peace Prize winner. We also note very current Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. You know where she comes from. She's from Nigeria, and she is the current Director General of the World Trade Organization. And this is a big deal. She is the first woman ever to head that very important international trading organization, and we must clap for her. We cannot forget our very own right here on this continent, and there are many. And those, I only mention one, but it's not to say the others are not important because of time. Our very own late Professor Wangari Maathai. As you know, she was the first African woman to receive and to win a Nobel Peace Prize for her work, that she did something extremely forward-looking and visionary, and our leaders here in this country, they didn't understand her at all. She was able to link the importance for women and the role women play in linking the issues of sustainable development, peace, and matters of equity, equality, and justice. She was seen as the enemy of the state, and she was making a very simple point, using very homemade example of through what? Our Green Belt movement. She understood climate change 30 years ago, when many of us didn't, when our politicians were saying that there is no connection between rain and what? But the media would remember they were making ridiculous statements that showed their level of ignorance. But I remember Professor Wangari Maathai, because she was also a professor of the University of Nairobi, where myself and Professor Mitura seated there, as still remain teachers in our old age. So African women have already shown their capacity to claim space at the very highest tables of decision-making. But as I have said before, and I have done that in writing and in other places I have spoken, we need to be careful with the issue of numbers. Numbers do not translate to influence. And you can be sitting at the table where decisions are being made and you are making absolutely no contribution. And so in our interrogation here, we must think beyond numbers. How do we make those numbers be effective and work for women in the transformative change that we are looking for? Because the numbers are going up, in some places very gradually and very slowly, but they are going up. But we have to ask, what is the difference that they are making? Beyond access, are these women able to set the agenda, say the agenda of parliament, to be able to transform that very patriarchal institution, very undemocratic institution, into something of what we all wish to have? And if they are not, and mostly they are not, we need to find ways of supporting them and making those numbers work for women. So I'm saying access is not enough. And being in a decision-making institution, therefore, is something which we have to work hard to get those women who are there to become transformational leaders, to set an agenda and influence their decision-making and its outcome. And in order, in the final analysis, to reach a stage where we can say true equality, influenced by women's agendas, has really been achieved. It means we must dismantle structural and cultural barriers that sustain hegemonic masculinity in leadership and governance. It means we must consciously mentor the next generation, people like Lynette Shapuril, so that such women, when they are in politics, are no longer seen as exceptional, but as an essential part of what you need to do. So the next step must focus on ensuring women have the institutional backing and the resources to have the capacity and commitment to become transformational leaders once they are in positions of power. And what's the role of the media in that regard? You still have a crucial role to play in this by moving beyond superficial coverage of female leaders and monitoring and focusing on their substantive contributions and amplifying those contributions and policy impacts in a manner that can motivate them to improve their performance. So as I conclude, I want to summarize as follows. We need ourselves. As I said, it is passing on the blame and lamentation is not where we want to go. We must be action-oriented. We need to move from passive consumers to active shapers of media. We need to work with the media. In 1992, we succeeded because we went to the media with an agenda, and they assisted us because we went holding an agenda. We weren't waiting to just be covered. We must collectively demand the enforcement of gender-sensitive reporting guidelines and push for gender-balanced representation in newsroom and editorial leadership. Meaning even within the media itself, I know we have a media women's organization, AMWIC, but beyond that, even those working in the media, we need to see more gender balance and gender representation. It does make a difference. It is equally important to hold digital platforms accountable for the biases that often silence women's voices or perpetuate harmful stereotypes. By leveraging every available platform, from traditional news to grassroots podcasts, we can amplify women's stories of substance and leadership, ensuring that they are seen as more than just a spectacle, an ornament to be admired and discarded when it loses its shine. This effort in the media must be complemented, obviously, as I said earlier, by an educational system that prioritizes STEM education, digital literacy, and critical thinking skills to ensure that girls in rural areas have the same access to technology and quality education as their urban counterparts. And that teenage pregnancy, which we sometimes forget, and is increasing in this country, and the retention or return to school of those girls is never assured. In most likely, it becomes like a death sentence for young schoolgirls. We must also ensure women's, health is a related element addressed. And the media, in addition to what you may already be doing, you must play a more active role in providing us and shedding light on these issues and advocating for change, so that by next 30, the center or the centers of power will have shifted. And this would involve also what we are calling public participation, that changes direction, that we shift from the few at the top of the pyramid to the majority at the bottom, and in so doing ensure women, most of whom are at that level, have genuine authority and resources in every sector. Of course, we cannot forget that as women, our greatest responsibility is to mentor and nurture the next generation of women leaders. So they are not just at the table, but are empowered to take on the mantle of transformative leadership and to redesign the table itself to ensure a truly equitable future for all. And so as we continue to recognize the role of the media, let not the next 30 years be about counting women in the headlines, but about making women's voices central to Africa's story. From the village to the virtual spheres, from the newsroom to the boardroom. The future we want will not arrive by chance. It will arrive by choice. The choices we make as leaders, citizens, institutions, and communities. Let us make choices that honor the women who came before and after the 1995 Beijing conference. Because it is on them that, and whose shoulders today's young generation of women stand and seek to meet their needs. And that's why I'm appreciative of this intergenerational summit organized by the nation. It is a rare opportunity for us to use these 2 days to unapologetically seize the mantle of leadership and drive the process of dismantling the network of silence, exclusion, and the future will then be assured. It will be our future, and it will be a future where we exercise power meaningfully, democratize, redesign governance institutions and processes. Therefore, for the next 30 years, the struggle is not about asking what others can do for us, but rather what we can do together in solidarity. This cannot just be a wish. It demands hard work that requires our full and sustained commitment. Thank you very much.